I'm Lloyd Dobbins. On First Camera this evening, there's a report on how some few Vietnam veterans are reacting to the war and to their homecoming by getting away from society. They've moved into the mountains, and they mean to be left alone. But our opening story is about honeybees, the nasty-tempered ones that won't leave us alone and could cause billions of dollars worth of problems. They are Africanized bees, usually called killer bees. They are, if you will, the outlaw motorcycle gangs of the bee world. NBC News did a report about them in 1975, and we had to go all the way to Brazil, where the problem had started in 1957. We said killer bees were moving rapidly north toward the United States. To do this report about them, Steve Delaney did not have to go as far south, because the bees have moved a lot closer to us and are still heading this way.
Honeybees? Yes. Gentle makers of sweets and pollinators of flowers? No. They are African bees, bad-tempered, virtually unmanageable, and they're heading our way. For thousands of years, men have used the almost identical European bee as a partner in making honey and in pollinating crops. But that will change in this country by the end of the decade. Our little partners are about to lose a genetic struggle. European bees are so useful because they rarely get annoyed enough to use their stingers. With the African bees, that is just not true. They are 10 times more likely to sting, and almost everything men do provokes them. The sting itself is no worse, but their instinct to protect the hive is so strong they'll attack anything that moves near the hive. That instinct makes the African honeybee a public menace in populated areas. This is what happened in Brazil more than 2 decades ago when the African bees first came swarming out of the jungle. They were quickly named killer bees, and Hollywood churned out a few bee movies playing up their ferocity. But people did die. People still do if they absorb too many stings. All this began in 1957. A geneticist brought African queen bees to Brazil to breed a better bee. Dr. Warwick Kerr thought the hybrid bee would produce more honey. It wasn't a very good idea, either genetically or ecologically, and the experiment was never completed. Somebody left off the hive covers, which prevent the larger queens from leaving their nests. 26 African queen bees and their swarms took to the woods, where they have driven all European honeybees to extinction. Since then, they've spread all over South America, limited only by the cold in the Andes and in southern Argentina and Chile. Random migrations have also brought them north, steadily and with no visible gentling of their dispositions. They now number in the trillions and are plaguing Central America.
This is the fabled Panama Canal, the most convenient point in the world in which to divide the American continent. South America over there, North America over here. When the bees first began moving toward the north, there was some faint hope, wishful thinking more often than not, that this barrier would stop them because the isthmus is narrow here and because there's a water barrier. Well, that just didn't work. By now, they've gotten as far north as Costa Rica, and 2 years after their passage, people in Panama City are still fighting them in almost every backyard.
There are now SWAT teams fighting the bees in Panama, and they are busy.
Bien, como no, allá estaremos.
It's warfare by protective clothing and handheld sprays, as in this case, where ditch diggers disturbed a wild nest in the dense undergrowth. Unlike European bees, which are quite at home in man-made hives, African bees won't stay put. They move around frequently. Any insecticide will kill them, but this battle is a standoff. The bees are still there. In Panama, so far, they haven't killed anybody. Health officials in Panama thought about aerial spraying, but decided against it, because wild hives are so often located in deep cover, which must be pried away by hand. The bees are being studied intensely out in the jungle where they can't bother anybody.
The area that they'll defend is what, a radius of 100 yards, 100 meters?
The rule of thumb is it goes up to about 200 meters that they're actively looking for something to sting once they're disturbed. That's the biggest difficulty with the bees. They can't be kept anywhere near people.
Are you braver than I am, or are you going to get suited up too?
Oh, yeah.
The idea is not to give them any place to get at you, right?
Right. The smallest little hole, they will go in.
I think I might even make an extra pass or two around here. They'll do their best to terminate me back there, huh?
They will. They'll keep at it.
Dr. David Rubik is the leading bee expert with the Smithsonian's Tropical Research Institute.
Now, I'm to persuade myself that I feel safe in this, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the important thing. Keep saying they can't
They can't
get
get me, they can't get me. Do I sound like a believer?
Not yet. Okay, then let me get tape. That's going to take a bit.
Oh, boy. Ever had any visitors in that suit?
Yeah, I think most people who work with African bees sooner or later get a few bees in their bonnet while they're working.
Now, wait a minute. You just told me I'm safe.
You are, but people who do this day after day sooner or later make a mistake. Like I said, everyone who's worked with African bees long term sooner or later has to make the choice. Do I strip off my veil and get rid of these 7 or 8 bees that are going to sting me in the face? Or do I just tolerate them, because if I take off the veil, I'll get stung by several hundred bees? It's a real test of willpower.
30 miles into the jungle, Rubik keeps 2 hives of what he calls really bad bees. He got them from a beekeeper who found them so unmanageable that he began to fear for his own life.
As soon as I slide this drawer back in, that should be enough to get them going. Now we've got a sting response. Hold up that black camera. They'll go for any very dark object to sting. But they're all over my gloves now, trying to sting through the bee suit. They're all over around your head.
Get to the point where I feel sorry for them. The frustration and the rage.
When they're being bad bees, they're really bad bees.
They really don't want us here.
No, and they're willing to give their lives. Every one of these bees that stings you is going to die very shortly. If we had actually opened the hives or done anything more, we would actually have more bees out now.
I think we got quite enough, thank you. Listen, if we weren't protected, how many stings could we expect?
We could expect maybe in 5 minutes 200-300 stings.
What would that be enough to render somebody unconscious or kill them?
For a lot of people, yes, that would be enough. A big, healthy person could maybe be stung 500 or 600 times and not be outright killed, but they'd have to receive some sort of medical attention within a few hours.
Well, you made a believer out of me. Can we get the hell out of here now?
Yeah, it's about time.
All right, let's go.
I think we can do that with honor.
Panamanians play baseball with considerable zest, but they've learned to check out the ballparks and bleachers before they play. What follows looks suicidal, but we're assured it is not.
We have a swarm in the Little League Park.
Now I'm just going to try and get the queen out of here. This is a big lesson to learn about African bees. This is a swarm, a colony of bees that has just landed here. It's a colony in transit. They have no nest. They're just on the move looking for a place to build one. Swarms are generally completely unaggressive and are not going to sting anything unless they're severely bothered. However, when this same swarm establishes itself in a nest, a couple weeks later, when they have built their comb, when they have food stored there, when they have their offspring there, their behavior changes completely and they're capable of defending their nest very vigorously. Then they can become the aggressive African honeybee that has so much fame and bad reputation. A scientifically interesting problem, and it's just finding out what approximately 1 trillion bees that shouldn't be here at all are actually doing in the American tropics. Also, as, say, an organism that has ecological clout, I can't think of any other than the human species, perhaps, that interacts with more different kinds of plants and animals.
That interaction could eventually change the face of the tropical jungle. There are some kinds of flowers that African bees don't like. If those plants don't get pollinated, they may vanish, along with the animals that need those plants to survive. That is what Rubik means by ecological clout.
What most needs to be appreciated about the African honeybee is once they arrive in a place, they're going to stay there permanently.
The African bees have never yet been driven out of any area that they've colonized, and they've never yet been stopped from taking over new areas wherever there's warm weather. What that implies for the United States is fairly grim.
This is the Rio Grande River near McAllen, Texas. In the Rio Grande Valley, they know that sooner or later the Africanized bees are going to show up. Nothing that's been done south of here in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Panama, or anywhere else has had any promise of stopping the invasion before it reaches these shores. Predictions on how the Africanized bees have been moving north over the past few years have been extremely accurate. And the prediction for the invasion point in the United States is right here in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. We know they're coming, but we're not ready for them.
They should establish permanent populations in the southern United States below the 60-degree line.
Professor Orley Taylor of the University of Kansas is the man who has tracked the African bee migration to the north with such accuracy in the last few years. He's now projecting their spread through the United States.
We expect the bees to occupy the coastal areas of California up to about Santa Cruz, and then the desert areas in southeastern California with high densities in the Imperial Valley. They should have high densities in the western part of Arizona, but should occupy a good portion of the central and western part of the state. There shouldn't be very many African bees in New Mexico, but this part of Texas should have high populations, as will this part of Louisiana. And all of Florida will be heavily hit. Basically, we're talking about maybe the southern sixth of the United States that we expect to see occupied by African bees.
Taylor believes that if you cannot stop the invasion of the bees, and nobody's done it yet, the next best thing is to change the invaders by tinkering with their genes.
And the way to do that is to Europeanize this wild population, to cause those African queens to mate with European drones so that they acquire more and more gentle characteristics. If we can do this, it's conceivable that we can considerably change the dynamics of the whole African bee problem. Wish I had a lot more time. I really do.
He has perhaps until the end of the decade. So far, nobody has been able to breed the fierceness out of the African bee. What all that means for American beekeepers is big trouble. They've been used to handling hundreds of hives, moving them around like so much furniture, and their European bees don't seem to mind. The men squirt a little smoke on them from time to time, and that calms them down. The workers can even open up the hives and move the honeycomb racks around. Don Burkett is president of the California Beekeepers Association, and he knows that when African bees replace the ones he's got, things will be a lot different, a lot worse.
I've been a beekeeper for 18 years, and this is one of the most important things that's facing us. We're working with our European bees. You can take your finger and rub across the frame and look for the queen and not be stung, and you can transport them for hundreds of miles.
The reason Burkett and others keep so many hives is that they get paid to truck their gentle bees around to fields and orchards and high-density farming areas to pollinate the year's crops. Pollination accounts for 2/3 of their incomes. Honey is only 1/3. The hives are often placed near homes and roads, near people. But African bees would be likely to sting everything in sight after being bumped around this way, and may even pack up and leave the hive. So that vital pollination may become a lot more difficult, and Burkett thinks farming will suffer.
1/3 of what we eat comes from the pollination of honeybees. We're in trouble, not just beekeepers, many, many growers. It all adds up to the breadbasket of the world.
What can you do, what are you doing to prepare for this invasion of bees?
What are we doing? Nothing.
The foods bees pollinate amount to about $18 billion worth of farm produce a year. If that pollination becomes less efficient, what might be the cost to American agriculture?
Well, if we look at this $18 billion figure, and if we speculate maybe 10, 20%, 30% loss of efficiency, you can just imagine it's in the billions of dollars, maybe $3 to $10 billion.
Professor Norman Gary, a bee expert from the University of California at Davis.
When you go to the supermarket, you're going to have to pay a lot more for some of these items. This is what I would fear most about the killer bee. I would fear that more than I would the problem of perhaps getting stung someday.
There are distinguished experts who disagree with the prevailing pessimism. One is Dr. Roger Morse of Cornell.
Most of what you've heard about killer bees is a bunch of humbug. Our beekeepers are knowledgeable. They can cope with any little differences that might arise. I'm not worried about any major changes in American bee management. I've got a lot of faith in our producers.
You know, that attitude that it can't happen here, I have seen everywhere I've been in South America. And it's a very interesting attitude. You know, the disasters always happen someplace else. And one country after another, they say, oh, this was a Brazilian problem. It can't possibly happen here. It can't be as serious as it was down there. And everywhere I've gone, I've seen history repeat itself.
What we know about the Africanized bee after years of study is that it's on its way, it is nasty-tempered, and it's probably going to have a negative impact on American agriculture. What we don't know about the bee is how to modify its behavior, how to teach it manners so that it can get along with the rest of us. There doesn't seem to be enough money or enough time or enough breakthrough in research to answer that question before the bee comes across this border.
Experts feel that the killer bees will be permanent residents of 11 southern and southwestern states, but that during the summer months, swarms could reach as far north as Chicago and New York. There is some argument about that, but none about this. In agriculture, the damage they will cause will be measured in billions of dollars. However, beekeepers in Brazil, who have had more than 25 years to figure it out, have learned to work with killer bees. But it is dangerous, time-consuming, and isolated. It just isn't possible in a populated area, not even on a farm. Killer bees have killed some people, but they have killed many more farm animals.